Part 1 Radio Setup.
The new Hyper 2.4 GHz radio comes with many new features. This 2-channel radio has steering with the trim tab above the wheel, throttle and brake trigger with the trim tab under the wheel. The servo reversing switches are located on the face, with the steering reverse switch with the left and right endpoint adjustments, throttle reverse switch with brake endpoint adjustment and throttle endpoint adjustment. The steering dual rate has easy access for your left thumb. The first thing to check with your new car is to make sure your receiver and transmitter are bound together. Also check to make sure your servos are working and rotating in the correct direction. If the radio is not working, check to make sure you have the batteries in correctly, then try rebinding the receiver to the transmitter. To do this, turn your transmitter on first, then turn the power on your receiver and press the bind button for 3 seconds. You normally do not have to rebind a receiver to a transmitter, but occasionally this is required. After binding, everything should work normal. If you find a servo turning in the wrong direction, simply flip the switch on the face, and this will change the direction of the servo rotation. If your servo is rotating too far in binding, this will damage the servos. You will have to adjust the endpoint adjustments on the transmitter to decrease the rotation. To reduce rotation, simply rotate the EPA knob to decrease the servo throw. Simple adjustments like this will greatly increase the life of your servos. This is your throttle linkage, and this is your brake linkage. Pull the trigger to open the throttle and push the trigger to apply the brake. Note the 1 mm gap between the throttle linkage and the servo arm in the neutral position. If there is too much of a gap or no gap at all, use the throttle trim tab under the wheel to make the proper adjustment. The throttle servo should only rotate enough to open the throttle completely and no farther. For the brake, it should only rotate far enough to stop the vehicle. If the servo is moving too far or not far enough, you can adjust the endpoints independently for both throttle and brake. To adjust the brake, push the trigger all the way forward, then rotate the knob of the brake EPA so that you have enough brake to stop the vehicle but no more. You adjust the throttle in the same way by pulling the trigger, then rotating the throttle EPA till you have full throttle but no more. Now you're ready to fire up the engine and hit the track.
Part 2 Engine Tuning.
The Hyper's engine has a carburetor with 4 adjustments. This main needle valve affects all the mixture adjustments on the carburetor. The low-end needle located on the slide affects the mixture from idle to mid-throttle. The large brass barrel screw on the side of the carburetor is set at the factory and should not be adjusted. The angled screw on the front of the carburetor is the idle stop. The idle stop will prevent the slide from closing completely and choking the motor. The carburetor is set at the factory with about a 1 mm gap. The Hyper engine uses a standard threaded glow plug with a single brass washer. You can test the glow plug by placing it on the glow igniter to see if it actually does glow. Use a good quality model car glow fuel with 20% nitro. Before starting your engine, turn your transmitter on first and the receiver second. It's always a good idea to also check to make sure your servos are working. You can prime a cold engine by placing a finger over the exhaust pipe and turning the motor over a couple of times. This pressurizes the fuel tank and pushes fuel into the carburetor. Then place the glow igniter onto the glow plug and pull the pull start. When using a pull start, do not pull the rope all the way out. It is best to pull in quick 1-foot increments. If the engine becomes flooded and hard to pull, it could be because of too much fuel in the cylinder. If this happens, remove the glow plug and turn the motor over a few times. This process will remove the excess fuel out of the cylinder. A brand new motor will sometimes lock up at top dead center because of the pinch of the sleeve. If this happens, rotate the flywheel counterclockwise with a flat blade screwdriver until it rotates freely. When adjusting the mixture of the carburetor, always adjust the main needle first. This affects everything on the carburetor. This is an example of a motor running rich. The motor will sputter and cough with a lot of smoke coming out of the pipe. When the engine is running rich at full throttle, turn the main needle clockwise to lean it out. You only need to turn the main needle 1/16 to 1/8 of a turn. The best way to tune a motor is to start rich on the main needle, Then make full throttle passes, leaning it out a little bit each time. Stop at the point where the motor sounds crisp and still have smoke blowing out the pipe. This is how your motor should sound. Now I'm going to lean the motor too far. Note the sound and the lack of smoke coming out the pipe. Only after adjusting the main needle can you adjust the low end needle. The idle speed of the engine will sometimes change when making an adjustment. When leaning out the low end needle, you will sometimes have to lower the idle by turning the idle stop screw counterclockwise. You want the idle speed to be high enough to maintain a reliable idle, but low enough so that the clutch does not engage. After the motor's been warmed up, pinch the fuel line right at the main needle. If it takes more than 2 to 3 seconds to kill the motor, you will need to lean out the low end needle. You adjust the low end needle in 1/8 to 1/4 turn increments. Turn clockwise to lean, counterclockwise to richen. The low end is now too lean and will have to be richened up. Remember, 2 to 3 seconds is just about right. A good maintenance tip is at the end of the day to remove all the fuel from your fuel tank. Then start the engine to run all the fuel out of the tank and the lines. You may have to restart the motor several times, but this will reduce corrosion and rust inside your motor.